Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's discussion on inclusion related to those in the disability community. I'm Carolyn Bolelli, Senior Manager, Global Learning and Development here at ResultsCX, and I'm with a very old and dear friend and colleague, Jonathan Slivka, to talk about his life and career experiences as a member of and advocate for the disability community. John, thank you so much for joining me to help us as an organization gain more insight on this important topic. First, I'd like to share a little bit about you and your background in this area. You've really been a trailblazer who's broken barriers for your whole life. You were one of the first students with a disability who was mainstreamed through the West Hartford, Connecticut public school system. You were the first person with a disability to play in the West Hartford Little League, and the first student in a wheelchair to play on a West Hartford high school tennis team. In your professional career, you've always pursued opportunities to advocate on behalf of persons with disabilities. In 2014, you were appointed by the Governor of Connecticut as the Governor's Liaison to the Disability Community, which was a newly created cabinet-level position in which you focused on key issues in the areas of employment, housing, education, and transportation on behalf of the disability community. And in that role, you served on numerous committees and working groups that supported these efforts. You're currently the Executive Assistant to the Commissioner of the Department of Aging and Disability Services, where you serve on various task forces in the areas of transportation, police interactions, and hate crimes from the perspective of these communities. You also volunteer with a number of organizations, including the Hospital for Special Care's Yvonne Lendl Adaptive Sports Camp that was actually founded by your mom back in 1991. You've also worked with the West Hartford Commission for Persons with Disabilities, and you're a founding member and the newly elected president of the Board of Directors of the Miracle League of Connecticut. So with all that said, how have you had to advocate for yourself, and how do you define inclusion of the disability community in the workplace?
Well, first of all, Carolyn, thank you for having me be a part of this and inviting me to be here. It's great to see you and be with you again to do this. And thank you again for that fantastic introduction. You sell me better than I could sell myself, and when we're done here, I'm hiring you as my agent. To answer your question, I think inclusion of the disability community in the workplace begins with communication, leading to education. In my experience, far too often, the attempt to address the needs of the disability community within organizations happens within silos, and persons with disabilities are often not in those silos having those conversations. For persons with disabilities, each lived experience is unique, and that makes addressing their needs in a silo impossible. Mm-hmm. In my professional career, I've had to advocate primarily on issues of accessibility in terms of appropriate parking, sizes of bathroom stalls, doorways and automatic doors, and certain workspace needs, such as a lower desk. I had to communicate those needs to make those changes happen. And that's the number one thing is communication. I think there's a collective responsibility on behalf of the employer and the employee with disabilities to communicate to the highest degree possible on their needs in order to make sure that the needs get addressed. And if the communication doesn't happen on a consistent basis, any advancement in inclusion will be a constant battle, at least within organizations where that communication is not happening. Mm-hmm. Companies don't know what they don't know with respect to the needs of the disability community by and large, and that's okay. But you can address that by including them in conversations, because it will go such a long way to bridging the gaps.
What barriers to inclusion have you personally experienced, and what have you done to address them within the various organizations that you've worked for?
Mm-hmm. I found that one of the biggest challenges is often a culture of fear within upper management of organizations. Ignorance or lack of education on addressing the needs of the disability community often leads to not wanting to initiate conversations for fear of either offending or looking ignorant. Mm-hmm. For me personally, I'd say engage in those conversations, because that's how you're going to learn. And I often will initiate the conversations myself, especially in workplaces where I've sensed that fear. Uh-huh. I believe I have a responsibility as an employee with a disability to be an ally to any workplace for others with disabilities, not just for myself. I don't pretend to know the needs of all persons with disabilities, but I do believe that advocating for myself can potentially have a snowball effect and encourage others with disabilities within the workplace to do the same. Additionally, this is an essential way to help companies look better and do better. So you'll always look better when you ask questions and engage in conversation with those that need issues addressed. Again, communication and education I'll always go back to those two things as being the essential components to addressing the needs and breaking down any barriers to inclusion for persons with disabilities in the workplace. But it needs to happen in a collaborative environment where everyone has a seat at the table.
Okay, so what can be done to improve the inclusion of people with disabilities in the workplace?
Well, the first thing I can do is have a week-long conference with any company that wants it, because this is something that it could be discussed in such great detail for so long. I'll give you a handful of things that I can think of off the top of my head
Okay.
that I think are easily, you can accomplish easily, and might be considered low-hanging fruit in that regard.
Great.
The first is, as I've said before, include them in the conversation. Find employees who've self-identified and they're willing to be part of the solution and help you out. And ask them how you can foster an environment that'll encourage other employees with disabilities to self-identify as well. That's a huge cultural thing that you can do that can have a very quick impact and be very, very powerful. The second thing that you can do, find other companies or professional organizations that are either getting it done or can give you the resources to get it done, so that you are continually operating in a mode of communication, collaboration, and education with all of those other companies and professional organizations. They're out there. You just need to find them and get involved. And then I think one of the other huge things any organization can do, create resource groups and other safe spaces within your company's infrastructure that can bring persons with disabilities together to talk about issues on an ongoing basis and create solutions, along with people that don't have disabilities. I would suggest that for credibility, these groups have as broad an organizational representation as possible, and they should either be led by an employee with a disability or an internal champion for the disability community who's mission driven. I guarantee you that everyone watching this either has a disability, knows someone with a disability, or has been affected by disability in some way in their life.
Sure.
When I think about inclusion and making sure that the disability community is part of the conversation, that they're at the table, there's a phrase that is often used by the disability community that says nothing about us without us. So if you want to truly be inclusive of the disability community in the workplace, then they have to be involved in every aspect of that inclusion.
Great, great. Thank you for sharing all those great suggestions with us. And thank you so much for giving us your valuable insight into inclusion of those in the disability community in our organization. Before we wrap up, do you have any final thoughts that you'd like to share with us?
I do. Look, this is difficult and challenging work. It has to be built into the ongoing day-to-day mission of your organization and your culture. Recognizing that ResultsCX is an international company, and the way that we do things here in the United States may not work elsewhere for any number of reasons, and that's okay. I would say that if you're only putting part-time into this work or approaching it just to check off a box, and I've seen that far too often, your employees with disabilities and other champions and advocates will all notice. When you're approaching this work and you're doing this work, you need to be intentional, you need to be conscious, and you need to be curious. And if you do those three things, you'll go such a long way and make great strides on behalf of your organization in furthering the mission.
Great, great. Thank you so much, Jonathan, for taking the time to help us better understand this important subject so that we can ensure the highest level of engagement with our employees who are a part of the disability community.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.